So the college football playoff that we have known for the past 10 years is completely changed forever, and we're never going to get it back to where it has been this past decade. And I think that's okay. I think the idea that only 4 teams were capable of winning the national title in some years was absolutely correct. I don't think you can argue that there were years where you'd be hard pressed to find 2 teams that were national championship caliber. And then there were years like this year where you had 6, 7, 8 teams that were national championship caliber. And so I think the sport as a whole is better served by a larger playoff. With that being said, roughly 40, or I guess roughly 30 college football playoff games in our back pockets now, and we had some absolute stinkers, and we had some fantastic games as well. So I thought, now that the 4-team college football playoff is over and done with, it'd be a fun little exercise to go back and remember what are the 5 best college football playoff games of the 4-team era. So that's what we're going to do today on this Sunday. And I hope you agree with some. I hope you disagree with some, because I don't have maybe the number, like if you were to close your eyes and think about like what's the quintessential college football playoff game in the 4-team era, I probably don't have that game at number 1. So we'll talk about it here on the Daily Huddle. Number 5 for me is TCU's win over Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl in 2022. TCU was a stupid heavy underdog. Nobody thought that they had a chance in this game. And for a while there, it looked like they didn't have a chance. There were 44 points scored in the third quarter. It was bananas, bonkers, unreal. Michigan got off to as bad of a start as you could possibly imagine. And it is one of the causes for, I've continually said until they didn't this year, that Michigan was good for one disaster per season where they beat themselves. And it was in this game that you saw it really come to a fruition. TCU had 2 goal line stands, got a pick 6, pressured the hell out of J.J. McCarthy pretty much whenever they wanted. When push came to shove and they needed a big play time and time again, TCU showed up big in a game that people argued that they didn't deserve the 4th final playoff spot. They weren't worthy of being there. And yet they ended up beating the number 2 team in the country. Now, Michigan was down 21-6 at the half and really had kind of no business even being in the game. But their dreadful start was too big of a hole to climb out of, and TCU got the win. Now, the 2022 national championship game isn't going to be on the list of the top 5 greatest games ever played in the college football playoff, if you catch my drift. I think my number 4 might have an argument to be number 1. It is, I think, it's definitely a top 10 game since the turn of the century. I think you could, if you made the argument that this game was number 1, I wouldn't argue with you. I would say, okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down here. I have Georgia's win over Oklahoma in the 2018 Rose Bowl. This game was bananas. OU led, I think, 31-17 at the half. Then Georgia came back, scored 24 unanswered points, I beg your pardon. Then Oklahoma scored 14 unanswered points to put it all, and Nick Chubb then scores a touchdown to tie it at 45. We go to overtime. And then in a game where nobody could stop the other one, and it was like, it was basically, it felt like that, good old fashioned, like whoever has the ball last is going to win. Well, when you go to OT, they kind of throw that out the window a little bit. But Nick Chubb scored a touchdown to tie it at 45 going to overtime. Neither side could stop the other. They trade field goals in the first overtime. And then in the second overtime, Oklahoma kicks a field goal. It's blocked. And then on the first play of the following possession, they get a tackle for loss against Georgia. So, like, things look horrible, right? Like, all Georgia has to do essentially is not lose yards. They're going to come out, kick a field goal, win the damn football game. They get a tackle for loss on the first play. It's like, oh, God, no. What are we doing? The next play, Georgia motions Jake Fromm out of the backfield. Sony Michel takes a direct snap to the crib for a 27-yard touchdown run. Georgia wins that fantastic Rose Bowl and goes on to play Alabama in the national championship game, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I truly think, for me, the best college football game since the turn of the century has been the Boise State OU Fiesta Bowl, where Oklahoma had no business being in the game late, and they score 3 touchdowns late to tie it up, and then you get the hitch, or I guess the hook and lateral. And by the way, it's hook and lateral. There's no such thing as a ladder in football. It's a hook and a lateral. It's one of my football pet peeves, hook and lateral. And it wasn't even a hook and lateral. It was more of an in and pitch. And I remember the pitch. I remember the in. The guy catches it. It's 4th and 19 or whatever. I'm like, get upfield, get upfield, get upfield. No, yes. On the pitch, it was such a wild game. And then you get this, the Statue of Liberty for the 2-point conversion. That's after a wide receiver like sprint out touchdown pass to a tight end wearing number 91. That game had everything. So to me, that Fiesta Bowl is the best college football game of the 2000s thus far, of the century. Georgia, Oklahoma could be up there. Like, if that was a title game and not a Rose Bowl, it's got maybe a little different feel to it. That was a great college football game. Coming in at number 3 for me is the Alabama 45-40 national title win in 2016 over Clemson. And really, what brings it to this point is, 1, national championship game, and then 2, Nick Saban called a really ballsy onside kick when the score was tied at 24. And I think you deserve a bunch, because there is not a bigger, there's not really a bigger roll of the dice than that. Onside kicks are not all that successful, and the chances don't really grow all that much when you decide to, like, hey, we're going to surprise them. Like, the numbers don't get exponentially higher. And it's such a roll of the dice, because if that doesn't work, you are crucified, especially in a game of that magnitude. It does work. Alabama scores 2 plays later to take the lead. Then Clemson responded, and then after Clemson responds, Kenyon Drake took the kickoff back for a 95-yard touchdown, where it wasn't one of those, like, he just caught it and ran straight ahead and he had to work for it, and he takes it 95 yards back for a touchdown. The onside kick is ballsy as all get out. It works. And you got to be, like, damn secure in your job to do something like that. And obviously Nick Saban was damn secure in his job. I mean, he didn't retire till like Wednesday. So the 2018 the 2016 national championship game, like, obviously pretty secure in his job. But Clemson could never really climb back in after that. But you get a 45-40 national title game. That's going to get you pretty high up the list. But that onside kick is, I don't like it. It's genius. But if that doesn't work, you spend an awful lot of time answering questions about, what did you do that for? Why did you think that was going to work in that situation? Were you afraid that you weren't going to be able to stop Clemson? Well, like, there's just so many questions that come with admitting, like, hey, we're going to need to steal a possession here. And if it doesn't work, yikes. The number 2 game on my list is the overtime thriller between Alabama and Georgia, 26-23 in overtime. And this game is remembered for two reasons, and two reasons only. And those two reasons are good enough to propel it to number 2 on my list. 1, Alabama benches Jalen Hurts for true freshman Tua Tagovailoa in the second half. Tua had played diddly poo in the season that thus far. And Lane Kiffin, after the fact, after it was all said and done, basically said, we kind of knew Tua was leaving. Tua was going to transfer because there wasn't going to be an opportunity for him at Alabama with Jalen Hurts there. But the offense stunk in the first half. And not just Alabama's offense, both offenses stunk in the first half. It was a super sloppy, poorly played first half. And people forget that because the ending was so good. And because for the second time on this list, Nick Saban gets ballsy and puts in a true freshman quarterback to replace his Heisman Trophy finalist in Jalen Hurts. So that's the first reason why it's remembered is you threw in a true freshman in the national championship game to really get kind of his first real action in college football. And he ignited the offense. He gets Alabama in field goal range for a game-winning kick. And it is no good. So you go to overtime. Georgia kicks a field goal to go up 23-20. And then they get this big sack on first down against Alabama that puts them back in field goal range. You go back 16 yards on first down when you're playing at the 25-yard line. When you're playing that close, that's a bad spot to be in. And again, if they lose that game because Tua Tagovailoa takes a bad sack on first down, oh gosh, the questions you got to answer. But on 2nd and 26, Tua Tagovailoa throws a deep ball to Devontae Smith, who will eventually go on to win a Heisman Trophy in his college football career for a touchdown and a title. So it's remembered for Tua getting injected into the lineup at the halftime, and also for a game-winning touchdown where Georgia just completely blows the coverage, where there's one thing that you can't have happen on 2nd and 26. There's one thing you cannot have happen on 2nd and 26 in overtime, and that's let the wide receiver get behind you. And Devontae Smith got behind him, made him pay, and Alabama takes home a title. That's a rough way to lose. Now, Georgia got their revenge later. And the win they got against Alabama in the title game didn't make the top 5 for me because it wasn't, again, it was a pretty kind of sloppy played game for a while. And then the final score wasn't indicative really of how close the game was, but a long interception return for a touchdown leads to a kind of lopsided score when it wasn't that wide, but it wasn't really a well-played game by any stretch of the imagination. So if 6-23 in overtime isn't the number 1, there's only one other choice, right? Or is there? No. It's just there's only one other choice, and it's the Clemson-Alabama, just absolute legendary 2017 national championship game. It, like other games in the college football playoff national championship, it began pretty slowly, but then it started to build momentum, and the final quarter was outstanding. Alabama they scored late to take a 31-28 lead. And I dislike the idea that when you score to go ahead, right, that you have done something wrong. If you leave, you left too much time on the clock. Well, the other option is try to burn some clock, and you're flirting with disaster. So I would take the sure thing, I think, 95% of the time. Anytime that the idea that you scored with too much time, I hate it. I hate the idea that you should have dicked around a little bit more and spent some time trying to waste some clock so they didn't have a chance to beat you, instead of just focusing on trying to put the ball across the goal line or kick the ball between the uprights. I think that's just what you gotta do what you gotta do. And if you score, go play some defense. But they left too much time on the clock for Deshaun Watson. Pushes the Tigers right down the field. hits Hunter Renfrow for a touchdown with 1 second left, gets the Tigers their first title in more than 30 years. Alabama fans are insistent that it was pass interference, and you know what? They're probably right. But you know who's got the stones to call that penalty in that situation? Not many dudes. And for as easy, and that might be the argument, is that it was such an easy pitch and catch from Deshaun Watson to Hunter Renfrow that it had to be pass interference. It was a pretty easy pitch and catch. There was still 1 second left on the clock, and Clemson has a timeout. So they get another crack at it if you call pass interference, and who the hell knows what happens at that point. But they didn't call pass interference because, like, that's a pretty big call to make in that situation. So they didn't, and Clemson wins the 2017 national championship 35-31 over Alabama in what I think if you were to say, like, these are and maybe that'll be a Sunday list at some point, is like the 5 best and biggest plays of the college football playoff in the 4-team era. I think there's like Ezekiel Elliott's 85-yard run through the heart of the South. I think maybe the Georgia pick 6 as Alabama's kind of driving down the field to try to cut into that lead. I would say Sony Michel scoring the game-winning touchdown against Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl. And then you get the Devontae Smith touchdown catch. Those are 4 of the 5, I think, that are on your list. And I guess if I thought about it more than about the last 30 seconds, I'd probably be able to give you all 5 right now. But I think those are sort of the quintessential, and maybe the other one is the, like, Jameis Winston going back to pass and looking like he just saw a ghost and losing the football, and that Florida State game just didn't go very well for them. But those are kind of the quintessential college football playoff 4-team era plays and 4-team era games. And you see them on display there, 5 through 1. Now, I want to know what you think. What's your number 1, number 2 college football playoff games of all time? I want to hear from you. Hit me in the comments below, and we'll see what you come up with. But let me know. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you are watching here on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we are pumping out. And if you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a really long way in helping out the channel. Back at it tomorrow here on the Daily Huddle. Saturday Glory.